In this video, I'm going to show you how to build Spring Boot microservices that use Hystrix circuit breakers, monitor those circuit breakers on the Hystrix dashboard, and run it all on IBM Cloud Kubernetes. And we're going to do it using everyday tools that you're already familiar with. The app is going to have two microservices, a Turbine server to collect the Hystrix streams, and a Hystrix dashboard to monitor it. To build the microservices, we'll use the Spring initializer with dependencies web and Hystrix. The actuator dependency will allow us to send streams to the Hystrix dashboard. Now I open the generated project in my favorite IDE so we can fill in our microservice. The class level enable circuit breaker annotation is needed in order to allow circuit breakers to work in this class. REST controller, because our microservice is going to be a REST API. I'll just paste the rest of the demo code in. We have a REST endpoint that just returns the name of the microservice plus the local IP address plus whatever is returned by the Hystrix command, which is in the service below. The Hystrix command annotation says this method is protected by a circuit breaker. So if the method fails, the fallback method will be invoked. Or if the circuit is open, then the method won't be invoked at all. Control will go directly to the fallback method. That's it. Just two annotations and we have a circuit breaker. Now let's build and run it locally just to see if it works. We'll issue curl commands to our REST endpoint on localhost, and we should see that roughly half of the requests fail and half of them succeed. If we send the requests fast enough, we should get enough failures to trip the circuit open. There we go. After 5 seconds, the circuit should reset and the next request will go through, like that. So now let's run it on an IBM Cloud Kube cluster. To do that, you're going to need to create a cluster, a registry namespace, and install the command line interface. These web pages will show you how. There's a lot of ways to build and deploy images to Kubernetes. For this demo, I'm just going to use Docker and kube control commands. A simple Docker file just copies the Spring Boot jar and starts it up. The image tag has to start with the address of the IBM Cloud Image Registry, followed by the name of your image registry namespace, PW Bennett in this case. Then we'll push it to the Cloud Image Registry and create a deployment and a service with kube control. You'll always be able to use standard commands like this with IBM Kubernetes, but we also have a really nice set of developer tools that we'll be telling you a lot more about soon. One thing I like to do is start the Kubernetes proxy so that I can use the kube dashboard to monitor the cloud cluster. Our deployment and our service are green, so we're ready to issue some curl commands. Now to hit our REST endpoint on the cloud, we're going to need the public IP of the worker node and the public port of the Kubernetes service. I had already created a cluster named my cluster. Again, we'll issue curl commands really fast to overload the circuit. And after 5 seconds, the circuit will close up again. So now let's build a Hystrix dashboard to monitor the command. Again, we'll use the Spring initializer to generate a project, but this time with dependencies web and Hystrix dashboard. Now the only thing we need to add here is enable Hystrix dashboard, and then we're done. How easy is that? Well, I lied. We do have to add a dependency for Turbine so that the Hystrix dashboard can accept a Turbine stream as input. And again, a simple Docker file that just copies the Spring Boot jar and starts it up. Now I'll just build the Spring Boot jar locally right here in the IDE. Now we'll build and deploy the dashboard container again with Docker and kube control commands. Now we're ready to fire up the Hystrix dashboard, for which we'll need the public port of the Hystrix dashboard Kubernetes service. But first, let's check the Kubernetes dashboard to make sure that our Hystrix dashboard started up okay. And it's all green, so we're good to go. We'll use the same worker node public IP and the public port of the Hystrix dashboard. Cool, Hystrix dashboard is working, so now we just have to point it to the Hystrix input stream. Notice that because the dashboard and the microservice are in the same kube cluster, we can use the name of the kube service instead of an IP address thanks to Kubernetes DNS. And we can now monitor our microservice on the Hystrix dashboard. Nice. So now we have this. The problem is that the Hystrix dashboard can only accept one input stream. That's just what Turbine was created for, so we'll use a Turbine server. But Turbine was originally written to discover AWS virtual machine instances, and we're running on Kubernetes. There's a project called Kubeflix that contains a Turbine server that has been modified to run on Kubernetes, so we'll use that. To use the Kubeflix Turbine server, we first need to clone the repo and then build the project. One thing we need to do to get the Kubeflix Turbine server to run on IBM Cloud Kube is set the Kubernetes master environment variable to point to the Kubernetes API endpoint. We'll do that in a script, which then starts up the Spring Boot jar. So we'll need a Docker file that includes our script and invokes it. Again, we'll build with Docker and deploy with kube control. And fast forward through the build and deploy. Quick look at our Kubernetes dashboard. We can see that the Turbine server deployed successfully. Now we have to tell the Hystrix dashboard to use the Turbine stream. There it is, Turbine server working. Let's do a quick curl command just to test it out. Cool. Now to show multiple input streams, we'll scale the microservice to 3 instances. Kube dashboard says our instances are ready to go. Okay, let's open up some circuit breakers. And right away the dashboard shows that we have 3 hosts for microservice 1 instead of the 1 that we had before. With Kubernetes load balancing between the instances, I can barely type fast enough to trip one of them open. There we go. So without the Turbine server, we wouldn't have seen 3 hosts on the dashboard, even though Kubernetes would have been load balancing between the 3 instances. After 5 seconds, that open circuit should close up again. To add a second microservice, we're going to cheat a little bit here and just go into microservice 1 and change the name to microservice 2. Also have to change the Docker image and Kubernetes deployment and service names. I've already built that and deployed it. And we see the second microservice show up on the dashboard. So there we have it, Hystrix circuit breakers and dashboard all running on IBM Cloud Kubernetes. How cool is that? I hope you found this useful. For more on running Spring workloads on IBM Cloud, check out our Spring at IBM page.